November 14, 1943, 11:58 p.m. The basement of the Sugar Hill Social Club smelled like copper and cigarettes. Two men lay on the concrete floor. One was already dead, a single bullet hole in the center of his forehead, eyes still open, staring at nothing. The other was bleeding out from his stomach, gasping, trying to hold his insides in with both hands. Bumpy Johnson stood over them, a .38 revolver in his right hand, still smoking. His suit was immaculate, not a drop of blood on him, not a hair out of place. The dying man, Salvatore Sally Eyes Mancini, looked up at Bumpy with confusion more than fear. They'd been partners, associates. Sally Eyes had eaten dinner at Bumpy's table, had kissed Bumpy's wife on the cheek, had called him brother for 3 years. "Why?" Sally Eyes wheezed, blood bubbling from his lips. Bumpy crouched down, bringing his face close to Sally's. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "You know why." 3 words, and in that moment Sally Eyes did know. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened to speak, to explain, to beg. But Bumpy had already stood up, already raised the revolver, already pulled the trigger. 2 bodies, 2 bullets, 2 men who thought they'd outsmarted Bumpy Johnson. What nobody knew, what the history books will never tell you, is that those 2 bullets didn't just end 2 lives. They ended a conspiracy that reached from the docks of Manhattan all the way to the top of the Luciano crime family. And Bumpy Johnson had known about it for 6 weeks. He'd watched it unfold. He'd let them think they were winning. And then, in one night, in one basement, he erased every trace of their betrayal and sent a message that would echo through New York's underworld for decades. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, you're going to want to fix that right now, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything you thought you knew about Bumpy Johnson. To understand what happened in that basement, you need to understand what Harlem looked like in 1943, and why 2 Italian mobsters thought they could steal from Bumpy Johnson and live. It was the middle of World War II. America was fighting overseas, but a different kind of war was being fought in the streets of New York. Lucky Luciano was in prison, serving a 30 to 50-year sentence on prostitution charges. The Italian mob was in chaos, different factions fighting for control, old alliances crumbling, new ones forming every week. And in the middle of all that chaos, Harlem was thriving. Bumpy Johnson had spent the last decade building something the Italians couldn't touch. The numbers racket was pulling in more money than ever. Black soldiers were shipping out to fight Hitler, and their families back home were betting their nickels and dimes, hoping for a lucky number that would help them survive until their men came home. Every bet flowed through Bumpy's operation. Every penny was counted, recorded, and protected. By 1943, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was an institution. He controlled the numbers in Harlem. He had arrangements with the police, the politicians, and half the legitimate businessmen in Upper Manhattan. He'd survived wars with Dutch Schultz, negotiations with Lucky Luciano, and attempts on his life from every direction. Here's what you need to understand about Bumpy in 1943. The man was untouchable, and everyone knew it. The Italian mob had learned their lesson. They'd tried force, they'd tried money, they'd tried turning his own people against him. Nothing worked. So they'd settled into an uneasy peace. Bumpy ran Harlem. The Italians stayed out. Everyone made money, but peace makes men soft, and soft men get ideas. The arrangement worked like this. Bumpy's numbers operation generated millions of dollars a year. Some of that money needed to be moved, laundered, converted into legitimate business. For that, Bumpy needed connections to the Italian mob's banking operations. They had relationships with accountants, lawyers, real estate developers who could turn dirty money clean. The man who handled this relationship was Salvatore Sally Eyes Mancini. Sally Eyes was a mid-level earner in the Luciano family, a man who'd made his reputation as a fixer rather than a fighter. He was 38 years old, good-looking, smooth-talking, the kind of Italian who could sit in a room with black gangsters and make everyone feel comfortable. He'd been working with Bumpy for 3 years, handling the money transfers, taking a percentage for his trouble. His partner was Marco the accountant Benedetto. Where Sally Eyes was charm, Marco was precision. He was 45, balding, wore glasses that made him look like a schoolteacher. But behind those glasses was a mind that could track every dollar, every transaction, every penny that moved through their operation. Together, Sally Eyes and Marco had earned Bumpy's trust. They'd been reliable, professional. They'd never skimmed, never stolen, never given Bumpy a reason to doubt them, until they did. October 1943, the war was turning. American forces were pushing through Italy and the Luciano family was worried. With Lucky in prison and the old country being bombed to rubble, they needed to secure their position. They needed money. Lots of it. Someone in the Luciano family had an idea. Bumpy Johnson's operation moved millions of dollars. What if they could take a piece of that money without Bumpy knowing? Not all of it, just enough to fund their operations, just enough to make a difference. The plan was simple. Sally Eyes and Marco would skim from the money transfers. A little here, a little there. Nothing big enough to trigger alarms. Over time, it would add up. And by the time Bumpy figured it out, if he ever did, they'd have moved enough money to be protected by the family. October 3rd, 1943. Sally Eyes met with a man named Vincent Torrio, a captain in the Luciano organization, at a restaurant in Little Italy. "It's easy money," Torrio said, lighting a cigar. "Johnson trusts you. He doesn't audit the transfers himself. You skim 3%, maybe 4%. Over a year, that's hundreds of thousands." Sally Eyes shifted in his seat. "And if he finds out," Torrio shrugged. "He won't. The man runs numbers, he's not an accountant, and even if he does find out, what's he going to do? Go to war with the whole Luciano family over pocket change." Sally Eyes thought about it. He thought about the money, about the security, about being more than just a middleman in someone else's operation. "Marco would have to be in on it," Sally Eyes said finally. "Of course, split 3 ways. You, Marco, and the family, everyone wins." "Everyone except Bumpy Johnson," Torrio smiled. "Johnson's had it too good for too long. Time someone reminded him he's not the only player in this city." Sally Eyes made his decision. He shook Torrio's hand. That night he brought Marco into the scheme. Within a week they'd started skimming. Here's what Sally Eyes didn't know. Here's what Vincent Torrio didn't know. Here's what nobody in the Luciano family even suspected. Bumpy Johnson had a spy in Little Italy. Her name was Rosa Colombo. She was 52 years old, a widow who ran a small grocery store 3 blocks from where Torrio had his meeting with Sally Eyes. She'd lost her husband to the Luciano family 15 years earlier, shot dead over a gambling debt he didn't owe. She'd been waiting for revenge ever since. Bumpy had found her 5 years ago. He'd been looking for eyes and ears in Italian territory, people who could watch and listen and report back. Rosa had approached him first. She told him her story. She told him what she wanted. Bumpy gave her a job. For 5 years, Rosa had been feeding Bumpy information. Who was meeting with whom? What deals were being made, which alliances were forming and which were crumbling. She was invisible, just another old Italian woman selling tomatoes and bread. Nobody noticed her. Nobody suspected her. On October 3rd, 1943, Rosa was sweeping the sidewalk outside her store when Sally Eyes walked into the restaurant to meet with Vincent Torrio. She watched him go in. She watched him come out an hour later, shaking hands, smiling. That night, she made a phone call. 2 days later, Bumpy Johnson knew everything. Most men would have acted immediately. Kill the traitors, send a message, move on. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He understood something that the Italians never did. Revenge is a dish best served with precision. He called a meeting with Illinois Gordon, his most trusted advisor. "Sally Eyes and Marco are skimming," Bumpy said, sliding a handwritten note across the desk. 3% on every transfer. They're working with the Luciano family. Illinois read the note, his face darkening. "How long?" "Started last week. They've taken maybe 5,000 so far." 5,000, Illinois looked up. "That's nothing. Why would they risk everything for 5,000? Because they're not thinking about 5,000. They're thinking about 500,000 over the next few years. They think I won't notice. They think I'm too busy running numbers to check the books." "What do you want to do?" Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold. "I want them to keep skimming. I want them to think they're winning. And I want to know every move they make, every dollar they take, every conversation they have. When I'm ready, when I know exactly who's behind this and how deep it goes, then I'll handle it." For 6 weeks, Bumpy watched. He had Marco's apartment bugged. He had Sally Eyes followed. He documented every transaction, every skim, every dollar that went missing. He learned that Vincent Torrio was the one who'd planned it. He learned that two other captains in the Luciano family knew about the scheme. He learned that they planned to expand the operation, to start skimming from other black-run operations across the city. By November, Bumpy had everything he needed. November 14, 1943. Bumpy invited Sally Eyes and Marco to a meeting at the Sugar Hill Social Club. A routine thing, he told them. Quarterly review. Nothing to worry about. Sally Eyes arrived at 11:30 p.m. Marco was already there. Bumpy's men let them in, led them down to the basement. Standard procedure. Business was always conducted in the basement. The room was sparse. A table, 4 chairs, bare concrete walls. Bumpy was sitting at the table when they entered, a folder in front of him. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, gesturing to the chairs. "Please." Sally Eyes and Marco sat down. They were relaxed, confident. They had no reason to be nervous. Bumpy opened the folder. Inside were papers, columns of numbers, dates, and transactions. "I've been reviewing our arrangement," Bumpy said. "The money transfers." Sally Eyes smiled. "Everything's running smooth, Bumpy. No problems on our end." "No," Bumpy slid a paper across the table. "What's this?" Sally Eyes looked at the paper. His smile faded. It was a detailed record of every transaction for the past 6 weeks with one column highlighted in red, the skimmed amounts. "I can explain, don't." Bumpy's voice was still calm, still quiet. "I've known since the first day, Sally. I've known about your meetings with Torrio. I've known about your plans to expand. I've known about everything." Marco's face went white. He looked at Sally Eyes, then back at Bumpy. "Bumpy, please, this wasn't our idea. Torrio came to us. The family pressured us. We didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Bumpy said. "You could have come to me. You could have told me what Torrio was planning. Instead, you chose to steal from me. You chose to betray the man who trusted you." Sally Eyes started to stand. "We can make this right. Whatever we took, we'll pay it back double, triple. Just give us a chance." Bumpy stood up slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a .38 revolver. "You had 3 years to prove your loyalty. You threw it away for 3%. Marco made a sound, something between a whimper and a prayer. Bumpy raised the gun, aimed at Marco's forehead, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the basement. Marco slumped forward, dead before he hit the table. Sally Eyes screamed. He tried to run. Bumpy shot him in the stomach. Sally Eyes collapsed, clutching his wound, gasping. Bumpy walked around the table and stood over him. The dying man looked up with confusion, with betrayal, with the realization of everything he'd lost. "Why?" Sally Eyes wheezed. Bumpy crouched down. "You know why." Sally Eyes opened his mouth to speak. Bumpy stood up, raised the revolver, and fired. 2 bodies, 2 bullets. The basement fell silent. Bumpy straightened his jacket. He looked at his men who'd been standing by the door. "Get rid of the bodies. Make sure they're found. I want the Italians to know exactly what happened here." Then he walked upstairs, poured himself a glass of cognac, and sat down by the window. He looked out at Harlem, at his neighborhood, at everything he'd built. The message would be sent. The lesson would be learned. The next morning, Sally Eyes and Marco were found in an alley in Little Italy, shot execution style. A note pinned to Sally's chest, 3%. Vincent Torrio got the message. So did the rest of the Luciano family. They called an emergency meeting. Torrio wanted to retaliate. He wanted soldiers sent to Harlem, wanted Bumpy Johnson dead, but the bosses overruled him. "Johnson didn't start a war," one of them said. "He ended a theft. Protected his operation, that's business." Another boss spoke up. "And he could have killed Torrio. He didn't. He's sending a message, not starting a war. We push back and every black gangster in New York aligns against us." Torrio was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Within a week, word had spread through every corner of New York's underworld. Bumpy Johnson had caught 2 men stealing from him. He'd known about it for 6 weeks. He'd watched and waited and documented everything. And when he was ready, he'd handled it personally. 2 bullets, clean, professional. The message was unmistakable. You can't steal from Bumpy Johnson. You can't outsmart him. You can't betray him without him knowing. And if you try, there's no family, no organization, no protection in the world that will save you. Bumpy Johnson lived another 25 years after that night in the basement. He saw wars, prison terms, and the transformation of Harlem from a gangster's paradise to something else entirely. But that night in 1943, when he put 2 bullets in 2 traders, that was the night he proved something that every criminal in New York already suspected. Bumpy Johnson was always watching, always knowing, always 3 moves ahead. The Italians never tried to skim from his operation again. Neither did anyone else. Because here's the lesson, the one that Sally Eyes and Marco learned too late. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And once it's broken, no amount of money, no apology, no promise can put it back together. Bumpy gave those men 3 years of trust. They threw it away for pocket change. And they paid with their lives. Look, if this story hit you different, if you understand why Bumpy Johnson is still the most feared name in gangster history, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing out because we're dropping these stories regularly, and the next one is even crazier than this. Drop a comment and let me know, did Bumpy do the right thing? Would you have given them a second chance? And turn those notifications on because next time, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson faced down 5 armed hitmen in a barbershop with nothing but a straight razor and walked out without a scratch. You don't want to miss that. Remember, in Harlem, betrayal had a price, and Bumpy Johnson always collected.